Many, many years ago, in the 1980s, all towns, cities, small towns, everywhere was full of young musicians. Well, musicians of all ages, but especially young musicians. On every single street, literally on every single street, there'd be at least 2 or 3 lads and lasses, mostly lads, because women hadn't really, it wasn't really seen as a thing for women to be doing music that much, really. It was still mostly lads. Anyway, that's a different matter. So on every street there'd be 2 or 3 musicians, young musicians, and all learning guitar, drums, keyboards. The object was to get in a band, to get famous and hit the big time. So what would happen is the competition was so strong because you had to get better than the guy in the street who was also a guitar player. So you had to get better than him. And then what you had to do was you had to get into a band, usually with your school friends, your mates, or some people from nearby streets. And within your area of your town, you'd have to become the best band. And that was a primordial soup. So what you had to do is, some guys were just doing it because, it was just a bit of fun for them, and other people now want to become a rock star, So you'd have, the next level would be bands. You get to 17, 18, and then they would jump ship to other bands. So you go from being a musician in your street in competition with 2 or 3 other lads in the street, to being in a band which is in competition with other bands in the area, and then you get in a bigger band, and that you would try and become the best band in your area. So all the time you're climbing up the ladder to get around better musicians and to get that elusive record deal. And every single town would have a small record label. Some towns might have 2 record labels. You're talking about a time in the 1980s where there was no internet, there was no computer games. That sort of came at the end of the 80s. Really, there was arcade games, but there was just football, music, and the television. That was it. And since the 50s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s, the biggest pull for everybody of all ages for entertainment was music. And if you're young, you wanted to become a rock star or a footballer. That was it. And those were your 2 options. So you're in a band and you're trying to get that record deal with that local label, which is also then a platform for your band to go into the big wide world and fight it out with the big guys who were on the big labels, who everybody knew the names of, or they did in that genre of music. And then obviously there'd be a different level where you'd go into top of the pops level, whereas people of all ages knew household name bands. So that was the goal. It wasn't not doable when you're sort of 15, 16. Yeah, let's just get on with it. Let's do it, Let's get there, So in between going from your terraced street to mega stardom, you had to go through recording studios. And just like in the 80s, how there was record shops everywhere, small labels everywhere, and music shops as well, selling musical instruments. I mean, literally, your nearest city would have 10 music shops all packed full of musical instruments. So you'd have to get into a recording studio. Usually you'd start off going all the way back with your first band, of the first bunch of lads you're in a band with, and you would have to write a few songs, because it was all about writing. You have to have your own songs. So you would write a few songs, and you would rehearse, possibly at this recording studio, local recording studio, which would do the demo tapes, but you'd have to rehearse, get them songs right. For some reason it was always accepted that you would do 3 songs. I think this was because it was the sort of understanding that you would really only go into a recording studio for the day, and it was expensive. So say if it was £100, that was a lot of money back in the 80s. So you would all chip in. If there's 4 of you in the band, you'd chip in £25 each. You'd be well rehearsed, you'd know the 3 songs you were going to do, and you would go into this recording studio that you'd probably been rehearsing in as well, in different rooms, and taking that leap, right, let's get this demo tape done. And usually 9 times out of 10 these guys were exceptionally good. Really, quite often it would be one lad running the whole thing. He mightn't own the studio, but he'd be the engineer and producer. And you know, when you're a kid, you're thinking these guys are pretty old, but you know, when you think back, they were only maybe 5 years older than you, in their early 20s and 20s, and I find, you know, it's remarkable how these guys would be able to take in different types of bands, like every day or 2, 3, 4 times a week, and create, you know, record these different types of bands, going from heavy rock to electric pop, all sorts of different types of music, and they would record all these different bands and performers on usually an 8-track analog tape desk recorder to such a high standard. I mean, really gifted young engineer / producers.